Hello and a very warm welcome to your local part of the show. Of course, this is a week when almost 170 years of steelmaking came to an end on Teesside. We'll be looking at how the town of Consett survived a similar fate over 30 years ago. And Nigel Farage has been in the North East this week to outline his vision for a future outside the European Union. But does business share his view? We'll explore. My guests here in the studio to discuss that and much more are Sedgefield's Labour MP Phil Wilson, UKIP's Phillip Broughton and Conservative peer and sometime charity walker Lord Michael Bates. Let's start though with the political fallout from the decision by the official receiver to shut down the blast furnace and coke ovens at Redcar's SSI works. Now, rarely has there been such anger among Labour MPs who've accused the government of standing back and allowing the steel industry to die.
Steel underpins the entirety of our economy on Teesside. And the government has turned its back on my constituents, it's turned its back on steelmaking on Teesside, and it's dealt a hammer blow to the UK industry.
Well, the government insists its £80 million package of support will ensure no worker is left behind by the closure. And the Steel Minister insisted the decision was due to market forces and not the government.
The price of slab, which was made in Redcar, has almost halved in 12 months. That's why they've never turned a profit. That's why they have, year on year, unfortunately made losses. And as I say, the coke ovens were making a loss of some £2 million a month. But we've done everything we can.
Business Minister Anna Soubry. Michael Bates, Anna Tilly wanted to ask a question at Prime Minister's Questions. Didn't get called, actually, but so you could be an outstanding PM. Don't get power crazed just yet. Okay. Well, why couldn't the official receiver have been asked to just wait 3 more months to see if this plant could be saved?
Well, they took a view that there wasn't going to be a potential buyer for the site. There are some very serious questions to ask about SSI and the funding of it. The plant would have closed sooner had the government not been working frantically behind the scenes to actually keep it open by making it possible and taking measures to meet payroll, to keep the employer's liability intact so that the plant could remain open. But actually all of those things ran out. And the big questions, which in time, once the anger, which is quite rightly there at the moment, subsides, is there will be some very serious questions asked about SSI and their handling of the whole situation.
And I'm sure none of those Labour MPs have got to defend SSI, but surely if the Business Secretary had said to the official receiver, who's a civil servant, look, can you just wait 3 months, let's see if we can find a buyer for this, such an important part of the economy, they would have done it, wouldn't they?
Well, I don't know what those conversations were, but my understanding is that this, as Anna Soubry was saying, that the plant has never made a profit. The price of steel has been falling on the markets. It's been loss-making, and there have been efforts by SSI to try and find alternative buyers for the site. Now, the reality is all of those have failed, and at what point do you then come in and try to offer some protection, some legal protection, not only to the employees but also to the creditors, such as PD Ports, who are actually in debt to that company?
It's not really helping them either, though, isn't it? Well, we'll come back to that. Phil Wilson, it's understandable to be passionate about saving a local business. The anger's there. This company's never made a profit, though, as Michael Bates said. I mean, steel prices are so low. Doesn't economic reality have to intrude at some point?
Well, you know, this is a tragedy. This is the ending of 170 years of steelmaking on Teesside. What at least I think the government could have tried to have done is to mothball the site, just like we did about 5 years ago when we had a similar problem.
But it costs public money, doesn't it?
It costs public money, but it's going to cost public money and a lot of money to close it and to clean the site. We think about £1 billion is going to be spent just to close the site down. What I'm concerned about is how much effort did the government put in to try and keep this open, to try and find a buyer, to say to the official receiver, give us 3 more months, let's see what we can do, and that didn't happen.
But, I mean, some of your MPs have been accused of scoring political points, and I mean, it doesn't really help people to kind of look through a prism of the 1980s as if this is a big, bad Conservative government. As you heard from Michael Bates, lots of efforts were put in, the wages were paid, the insurance was sorted out to try and keep this, but eventually you have to admit defeat. I don't think it's
trying to score political points, but all you're doing is asking the government, give us 3 more months to try and find a buyer. What we're asking the government to do is to look out there around the world, is there a buyer for this site? 3 more months, and we didn't get that.
Phillip Broughton, I'm sure you, as UKIP have already said, Jonathan Arnott, your MEP, that EU state aid rules are getting in the way here, and actually if we weren't a member of the European Union, we could have stepped in and saved it. That wouldn't have altered the price of steel. It wouldn't have made SSI any better a company. It's a red herring.
I think it shows you how little power and control we actually have as a country to make these decisions, though. At the end of the day, these state aid rules didn't stop France, didn't stop Germany, didn't stop Italy from coming in and helping their steel industry. At the end of the day, we're going to have 9,000 people that are going to lose their jobs because this government's inaction. They've sat back and they've let this happen. It's been a total and utter disaster for Redcar. And, you know, on the very day that this was being announced, what was the government announcing? That they were going to spend £25 million to build a jail in Jamaica. This is a useless Tory government with the wrong priorities.
Okay. A lot of people will be very surprised, though, that UKIP is now in favour of potentially nationalising industries like steel. That's not what UKIP stands for, is it?
What we're saying is we're not saying nationalisation. We're saying the government could have come in with a short. Well, the government could have come in with a short-term loan. Could have come in with the money that would actually help in the short term. This is a short-term problem. This is a short-term problem here. Where this industry needs help, we should be supporting British manufacturing. No, you haven't. You've let it go. That's what you've done, Lord Bates. You've let it go.
Michael Bates, so come back on that.
Well, my point is to say, listen, at some point there is intense anger, right questioning, and I think there are going to be inquiries. I'm sure select committees will be looking at this and saying what actually happened. That all needs to happen. But at the moment, there are people whose livelihoods are being lost, and there are people who are really worried about the future. And we need to send a message. We need to send a message to those people.
Would you share the concerns that £30 million of the £80 million of aid that was announced is actually going to go to redundancies? Should that be replaced? Because the MPs in Teesside didn't believe that was the case.
Well, listen, there's a task force in place here, a real heavyweight task force, and it's actually working with the local communities on that, and that's an ongoing dialogue about it. But I want to see that there's a message to the people of Teesside to say, listen, this is not the end of the road. This is not a concert situation. There are jobs in Teesside. There are 2,000 jobs coming with the serious minerals extraction. There's Air Products taking on staff. There's Hitachi taking on staff. There's NIFCO taking on staff. There are 284 new businesses every month opening up in Teesside. This is not the 1980s. This is a new Teesside.
But the government talks about a northern powerhouse, and you've failed. You talk about a northern powerhouse. Why don't you take some action and help this industry?
I just want to bring Philip Wilson back in here as well. It's not the 1980s.
It's not the 1980s, but it's still 1,700 jobs that are being lost. And what we want from the government is some action. It isn't the state aid rules. If France can get involved in saving some of their steel industry, the Italians can, and the Poles can go for state aid on their coal industry, I'm sure the government could have been active in trying to get the same for the steel on Teesside.
I'm absolutely sure we'll be discussing this again. Well, unfortunately, of course, Redcar isn't the first town to deal with a closure of this magnitude. Shortly after Mrs Thatcher came to power, as Michael Bates said, the steelworks in Concert were shut down with a loss of more than 3,500 jobs. And I've been to the County Durham community this week to see if there are any lessons to be learnt from the experience there.
We are not layabouts, we are not idle, we are steelworkers from Concert. And they're going to shut us down and put us on the dole.
Steelworks under threat, community campaign, defeat and recrimination. What Redcar's experiencing now, Concert endured in spades in 1980. But 35 years on, the site that forged steel for 140 years looks very different. So in Concert today, stop thinking steel, think Starbucks, stonking great Tesco, and stacks of really rather nice houses. But of course you can't entirely erase more than 100 years of steel making from the memory banks of a town. For these men, those memories are still vivid. All lost their jobs when Concert Steelworks closed. Their choice? Search for the few jobs left in a devastated town, or leave.
I went on a course for 6 months. When that course ended, there was nothing else. I had to make my own way. I started off, there was myself and my cousin, we started off doing window cleaning.
I was a skilled man in the steelworks, possibly, yeah, but outside the steelworks, I'm a labourer. And you just had to try and take whichever job you could get.
I went 4 year offshore, but I missed like 3 Christmases without my family. It takes a lot of doing when you've got a young family, 5 and 9, I think, that my daughters were.
But the repercussions for this community went even further.
Teenage pregnancies rose significantly. Boys' achievements at school went down because what was the point? They were used to the idea that if they worked hard, they'd get an apprenticeship at the works. They would get a job at the works. All of those sorts of things were really, really important.
Hope did arrive, though, in the shape of tortilla chips and mini poppadoms.
In the cultural centre of Europe.
Phileas Fogg snacks famously produced in concert. Their creator, Roger McKechnie, lured in by the offer of help, and this unit on a new industrial estate in 1982. New jobs created even while the steelworks site remained uncleared, a model he says could help Redcar.
They've got to get going fast. The steelworks will take years to be clean enough and sorted out enough environmentally to put factories up. So why don't you find a greenfield site, build the factories and take a risk? And with the money that we got from the government, which was deemed to be a grant and weren't we lucky, we actually paid back, I think, 30 times in the first 4 or 5 years.
And Consett has continued to recover. In 1981, the town's unemployment rate was 36%, 3 times the national average. Today, it's 5.3%, a fraction below the UK rate. But it's taken most of those 35 years to get there. And even now, regeneration work hasn't finished. Project Genesis, a development group formed to revitalise Consett in the 80s, is still working today.
Lack of confidence in the area meant that the economic investment that's required somewhere like Consett, somewhere like Redcar, is just that much slower to achieve. You can see the regeneration that's happened, you can see the amount of money which has been spent in Consett, but it did take an awful long time to actually get to this point.
Consett then can provide only limited consolation for Redcar. It proves recovery is possible, but the town will hope it won't take nearly as long. Phil Wilson, I mean, your constituency has suffered its fair share of economic shocks over the years. The Fishburn Coke Works, of course, famously went there. You've got Net Park and Hitachi now. Time just moves on, doesn't it?
Time does move on, but like we've just seen from that film, it's took 35 years to get to where we are today, and I would hate to think that Teesside has to go through that same time scale to get to where Consett is today. It's a long time, it's a lot of hurt, it's a lot of deprivation in the local area. But what we want to see is new industries come along. I have got Net Park, we have got Hitachi, and times do move on, but we need to take the people with them. And it's a shame that people so often have to suffer to get to where we are today.
Michael Bates, I mean, 35 years on, you can see that regeneration is still going on in Consett, and it has recovered. But actually, the problem as well is it's not the generation of steelworkers necessarily who benefited from it. And that may be the case in Redcar as well. It may be their children, grandchildren, who reap the rewards, not necessarily the people who've lost their jobs.
Yes, and those new enterprises will set up places like the university, which was a University of the Year, Teesside, a Centre for Creative Industries, which is now there on Teesside. We do need to have a big task in actually making sure that people do not, as it were, darken the name of Teesside and recognise that Tees Valley has in recent years become synonymous with forward-looking growth and ambition, and we want that to actually continue and to be built upon.
That particular town, Redcar, I mean, there's a lot of money got to come out of local businesses there. There's a real danger that it drags out for the same length of time that Consett did.
There is that there, and what we need to do is to make sure that the new businesses come in to actually grow where the old businesses were. And I think all the promise is there, and I think that the government will make sure that the resources and the training which is required to do that will be provided.
Well, I'm sure they've been pleased to dispute that. I might put Phil Wilson back in a minute. But Phillip Broughton, I mean, you are, there's no secret, the youngest while we were here. But do people of your generation, do they really want to work in a steelworks or coal mine as it used to be? Actually, Consett's a cleaner place now. A lot of those steelworkers said it was a dangerous place to work and the wages actually weren't that great.
I think we want a diverse economy. We want various different industries going. But I think the problem that the government has is that it talks a big game on the Northern Powerhouse, but at the end of the day, their inaction on Redcar shows that it is a complete and utter empty soundbite. That's what the Northern Powerhouse is. It means nothing. This was a chance to help people. This was a chance to support British manufacturing, and the government
it's one
chose
company,
not
isn't it, in this whole scheme of powers and resources that are coming into the region.
But the Chancellor talks endlessly about the Northern Powerhouse. This was a classic example where he could step in and help in the short term to protect the long-term industry. He's chose not to do it. Okay. This is a government with the wrong priorities.
Very briefly, Phil Wilson.
All I can say is that people do want futures in engineering. We've got a university technical college that's going to open in Newton Aycliffe, the first one in the northeast of England. That's going to be new apprenticeships with the new industries of the 21st century, and that, I want to see that a success.
Okay, all right. I'm sure Michael Bates will dispute the Northern Powerhouse as fast, but we haven't got time to go back to it just now because we're going to move on to another subject because we're moving on to Europe. And UKIP leader Nigel Farage was in the northeast this week at the launch of his Say No to the EU tour. He visited a wine bottling factory in County Durham. I wonder what attracted him there. And so the referendum would give Britain a chance to run its own economy. But does business in our region agree? Well, Andy Sanders runs a holiday cottage business in Northumberland.
The EU is not particularly trade-minded, it's almost protectionist. Certainly some of the member countries are protectionist, and therefore if we can allow ourselves to become part of the World Trade Organization with our own seat on that table, we can promote trade to the benefit of Britain, not just for the benefit of Europe.
But that's not a view shared by large inward investors like Nissan and Hitachi. Many local businesses too have concerns about the prospects of leaving. CableMate in Newton Aycliffe sells cable dispensers to electricians.
There are cash flow implications, there are paperwork implications, and for a small business, a one-man band like me, it's extremely worrying because it's just unknown, and no one is addressing that sort of level of detail on anything I've seen.
Okay, that's one view of one business. Phil Wilson, that company we saw there was actually in your constituency. You've actually been surveying businesses in Sedgefield about their attitudes towards the EU. What did you discover? What
we discovered is that 86% of companies still want to stay in the EU. 75% want reform, which is fine, but we need to stay in to change it. And 52% of the companies as well also thought that if we do come out of the EU, that would affect their investment strategies for the future. I'm not saying that any of these companies are going to close. I'm not going to frighten people, but what I am going to say, if it is going to have an impact on investment, it will have an impact on economic and job growth in the area, and that's the one thing that I'm really fearful of and why we shouldn't leave the EU.
Philip Broughton, I accept this is one survey, but there's been plenty of others. And Jeremy, would you accept that business, for the most part, a majority of business does not agree with you and believes that actually it's worth staying in the European Union?
I think the big businesses and the corporatists want to actually stay in the European Union because that actually stops small businesses. They don't want competition. This is the political class that actually want to stay in the European Union. What this referendum is about getting our sovereignty back as an independent nation where we can make our own laws in our own parliament. It's about being able to trade with the rest of the world. You know, the EU equates to 18% of global GDP. We're saying in UKIP, let's get out of the EU and get into the rest of the world, 82% of the world.
But you
and it's
you
about
really
controlling
think small
our borders.
businesses will be able to compete with the big businesses just if we leave the European Union? It's as simple
Well,
as
there's
that.
huge amounts of regulations. There's something like 3,600 new EU regulations that have come in since 2010 alone. And of course, the other issue, that, as I was saying, is it is about controlling our borders and controlling about our immigration, because we can't control our immigration policy while we're in the EU. Why is that? Because you have free movement of people across the European Union. 485 million people can go wherever they want, thanks to the free movement of people.
Okay, I don't want to debate immigration, but you've made your point. Phil Wilson, actually, in the detail of this survey, as you said, 3/4 of businesses actually want reform of the European Union. So they're not happy with it as it is. There is a distinct possibility they may get to the end of this process, see very little change, and actually have a change of heart themselves about whether they want to stay in the EU.
Well, like I said, I mean, you've got the big corporates like Philip was on about, but you've got smaller companies as well, such as Cromaker, my constituency, that employs about 60 people. Started off with only 3 people, but with the aid of the EU, it's now a PLC exporting
but
to the rest of Europe.
these companies want change, and if they get to the referendum, which is by the end of 2017, they don't see significant change, they might actually question this, mightn't they? They might say, well, I'd be in favour if we got rid of some of this red tape, but it doesn't seem we can.
Never get rid of it.
86% of the companies surveyed wanted to stay in. They want reform. They know fundamentally it's in their best interest to stay a part of a market which has 500 million consumers. And I think you'll find, Philip, that a lot of other surveys are saying the same thing. And the other thing what you've got to remember about UKIP as well, I mean, even Douglas Carswell, who was the only UKIP MP in Westminster, isn't supporting your campaign to come out.
Wait, there's 2 campaigns to come out of the European Union. Douglas Carswell's on one, Nigel Farage's on the other. They both want to come out of the European Union.
Let's not have that debate. Michael Bates, these businesses want change, so does the Prime Minister, apparently. But realistically, what's he going to be able to secure for them?
Well, I think Phil Wilson's survey is pretty accurate. I think where most people are, which is to say, listen, we recognise the big market. The Northeast is one of its great strengths. It's one of the only regions that exports more than it actually imports.
But what is the Prime Minister in this negotiation going to get back?
What he's actually saying is, there is the one on the job movement to ensure that people who come here are actually looking for jobs rather than for benefits. So there is a question on the benefit tourism. The other one is to say that we want an end to this project, which is called an ever closer union, and we want to emphasise the economic trade and particularly reaching out to other parts of the world that are growing faster than our own. And then we want to put that to the people.
Shift a lot of the red tape that these businesses, I suspect, are concerned about.
Well, we're also saying that we want a greater say for national parliaments and a lesser role for the centre, for the Commission. And so I think that these are important elements. And ultimately, listen, the one thing that we're saying here is that nobody's going to impose this on anyone. There is going to be a debate for the first time. Okay. I am 54 years old. Nobody's ever asked me if I actually want to be part of the European Union. People are going to have that chance, but after there's been a good renegotiation.
Phillip Broughton, here's your chance. What's the killer argument you're going to use to say we need to leave the EU when we come to this referendum?
Well, we're currently paying £55 million every day to be part of this club. It controls our borders, it controls our laws, it makes 75% of our legislation. You know, we can't even make our own trade deals while we're in this thing. You know, if we look at Britain, it's the 5th largest economy in the world. You're telling me outside the European Union we couldn't go and make trade deals with everyone? You look at Iceland, a country with a population the size of Newcastle, has a free trade agreement with China. We don't while we're in the European Union.
You haven't got very long, but give us the argument that you would make to stay.
I have yet to come across anybody who wants us to come out of Europe. There's no unanimity about what they offer if we do come out. What I'm concerned about is the risk of coming out, what the effect it's going to have on jobs, the effects that it's going to have on industry, and the effects that it's going to have.
We'll have to leave it there. I'm sure we'll be talking about this again before the end of 2017, if not earlier. Well, let's take a look at some of the other stories making the news this week, including a warning about budget cuts from Cumbria's police commissioner.